Mental Health, the Up&Up. We're trying to make mental health care clear, helpful, and maybe even fun. We're chatting with licensed therapists, but this is not therapy. These are simply thoughts and ideas for you to discuss with your own therapist and to help you on your journey of complete wellness. So, Geraldine, we wanted to talk this week about cognitive distortions, which, if I remember properly from when you and I talked about it, is when you believe two things at once? Or am I misreading that one?
So, no, it's not when you believe two things at once. It's when you take a concept that sometimes serves, that isn't necessarily false or true, but is sometimes helpful, sometimes unhelpful, sometimes matches the situation, and sometimes doesn't match the situation.
Okay.
So a real common example, or a real easily understood example of that is overgeneralization. This happened this way, therefore every single time it's going to happen this way.
Mm.
Which, if you're talking about, poking a wasp's nest, is very helpful. I poke a wasp's nest, and that now I believe every time I poke a wasp's nest, it's going to be a horrible experience. That's super helpful. Um, I spill coffee on myself. Therefore, every time I drink coffee, I'm going to spill it. Not accurate, not so helpful. Um, I have a teacher that I don't like. Therefore, every teacher is going to not like me. Not benign, like the coffee spill. It's kind of, but definitely not only not accurate, but not helpful. Well, I guess because it's not accurate, not helpful to our choices, to what
Mm.
kind of choices we make. So wasp nests, sure, uh, that makes sense to overgeneralize. Every teacher hates me, not so helpful.
So why is it called a cognitive distortion? The wording there just makes it sound like it's inherently a negative, because distortion usually means something is skewed and out of focus, and therefore wrong.
Yeah, and to me, it's like it can the object itself isn't wrong. Like the overgeneralization isn't a bad concept,
Mm.
but looked through, if your glasses aren't focused correctly, it can become an unhelpful thing.
I see. Okay.
So the distortions, yeah, are the discussion about the times when those things aren't working, but it isn't saying those concepts are wrong. They're just saying you're kind of looking at it a little off.
Okay. So it's about gaining perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
When we previously talked about this, the example I had was my overgeneralization that the world is full of a-holes.
Yes,
But looking at that through the perspective of yes, but there are still good people in the universe.
yeah. And the opposite isn't any more helpful, that the world is full of good and kind and wonderful people. Um, it's like if you clarify your focus, you
Mm-hmm.
can say certain types or certain people are assholes, certain people are helpful. And if you even narrow your focus more, you can
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, people who tend to kick dogs are I can overgeneralize that to people who are not super empathetic in general. So the more kind of we narrow our focus, the more accurate we get. And also, part of the cognitive distortion is how we narrow that down, is also very important.
Mm-hmm.
So if we see three people kick dogs and then also act in ways that are unempathetic in other areas, um, then we kind of overgeneralize
Mm-hmm.
to, oh, people who kick dogs tend to not have much empathy. But if we see three people wearing red shirts kick dogs, and we overgeneralize to, oh, I guess people who wear red shirts tend to have not much empathy,
Mm-hmm.
which actually is another cognitive distortion. And oh gosh, right now I can't remember what it's called, but it's the difference between causality and correlation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which again, the distortion is when two things are together, one of them caused the other.
Right.
Sometimes true, sometimes not true. Let's really focus in on that. So that's the idea of a distortion. Let's really focus in on whether those are causal or correlational or random,
Okay.
you know?
I like that.
Yeah. Last time we were talking about this, I had mentioned someone who got dumped at a Burger King and,
Right.
oh, I'm never going to go to it. Well, those are random. I don't even think correlational. Definitely not causal. Um,
It is not Burger King's fault. No.
yeah. So I was going to introduce some that are a little harder to see. Overgeneralization, we can see how sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't help, sometimes it isn't relevant. Overgeneralization, same. Go ahead, Anna.
Over specification can also be a problem, and my example for that is judging anybody who has a specific name by through that distortion. So, oh, I met this one guy named Andrew who is awful, so now every Andrew is awful. So that's
Yeah,
hyper specific.
yeah. However, I will also say that there are certain names, and I don't want to offend anybody by calling out names, but there are some correlational and causal things about names. Whether you pick a popular name, whether parents pick a popular name versus parents picking a family name,
Mm-hmm.
whether parents pick a name that kind of, I don't know how else to say it, kind of cutesy, but would be hard to say, you know, Dr. I'm not going to call out a name, but, Dr. Flopsy, where, it's
Right.
easier to call out, to say Dr. John or Dr. Beatrice, you know,
Right.
or also names that are tend to be seen as objects sometimes. Statistically, those do have some impact on that person's personality, because being raised by a person who names you the most popular name,
Mm-hmm.
those type of people tend to raise their kids with different values. People who
True.
name their kid biblical names,
Mm-hmm.
again, not everybody named Rebecca, but it's a stronger correlation that people who name their kids Rebecca might be naming them because of the biblical context, and therefore are going to raise their kids in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so some
Fair
of those
enough.
things, yeah, some of those things that seem random do have a correlational value. So again, that's why it's called a distortion, is that it's very easy to get things fuzzy,
Mm-hmm.
and again, either way. But yeah, working in mental health, there's kind of every generation, kind of like a popular name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, I think I've made my point on that, is sometimes there is a correlational value or a correlation that we just really aren't aware of.
This is a slight squirrel, but on correlation, there are several cultures that have this custom where picking a name for your baby is very, very, very important, and what you name
Uh-huh.
your child is important, and what it means. Um, I know in Jewish culture specifically, but I know that I think there's a few of the African tribes who have the same thing, where they think long and hard about what to name the baby because
Yeah.
they want it to be something that is life giving, that is going to help them move forward and
Yeah.
be who they should be in the world.
Yeah.
So I can see where correlative, and again, that's building values into what you named your child and then living with those values every day. I can see how that all lines up.
Yeah. And again, yeah, naming someone like a family name
Mm-hmm.
versus or naming someone after someone. I happen to know you are named after someone.
I
Yeah?
am.
Yeah.
It was a mix because it's also my mom's middle name.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
it ended up being a double whammy. I'm named after multiple people.
Ah, there you go. Yeah. But again, that's someone who values community and values
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And your parents,
Yeah.
um, I think I know, have raised you with those values,
Yep.
versus, uh, naming someone after. I always think it's funny how some women name their babies after the doctors that delivered the baby,
Oh,
which I think I've heard that I mean, it's an older generation type of thing, but I don't know whether they're just so exhausted and relieved after having a baby that they're like, oh, that's the name, or whether there is that sense of gratitude. You've helped me bring this baby in the world, and I'm kind of give back. Um,
I've seen that in films. I didn't realize it was so prevalent in actual everyday society, where so and so helped deliver my baby, so I named the baby after them. That was a thing. There's
Again, statistically, I don't know, but I have known people who have done that, not just one or two, several. So,
there's a movie where the one lady names all of her children after whatever she was craving when she was pregnant with them. So she's got Brownie, Baby Ruth, um,
yeah,
not Rice Krispie, but like they were like all the names
yeah.
of like candy bars. Hershey.
I Yeah, I recently watched a sitcom where there's a pregnant woman talking about names, and she was there like, oh, let me think of the second one. She was there like, I know one of them was Olive, and she
Mm.
just went like, uh, Olive, peanut, spaghetti. I think I'm just hungry. I wish I
That's
could think of
awesome.
something other than Olive, but yeah, it was that. Uh,
So
um,
I'm gonna segue to
Go ahead.
another pop culture reference that will get us back on track to cognitive distortions.
We do tend to
Uh,
go off track.
it's okay. One of my favorite movies ever is called Secondhand Lions, and
Ah,
in that movie, it's Michael Caine and Robert Duvall.
oh,
In that
interesting. I don't.
movie, yeah, it's you should watch it. It's wonderful. It's a good feel good movie. Robert Duvall's character has his how to be a man speech that he gives to young men throughout his life. He's like in his 70s when the movie starts or whatever. But he's given
Uh-huh.
this speech to lots of young men through the years. And he gives it to his little nephew. He gives him a part of it. And the part of the speech, I'm going to try to do this without getting all emotional. The part of the speech he
Oh,
gives to his little nephew is that there are certain things that a man should believe in no matter what, and it's that good triumphs over evil, that there are good people in the world, that true love never dies, and like it's this list of cognitive distortions that you should just
yeah,
believe in because it's what it means to be a good man, and like that's part of his thing.
yeah.
And so
And
it was a
again,
really good example of healthy cognitive distortions.
yeah. And again, it's about what serves you, what you already want in your life anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I again, maybe distorted as far as factual in a factual way, but as far as a reminder of how you want to live,
Right.
super helpful to look at that a little skewed.
Yeah.
To look at that like, yeah, true love never dies. Yeah. Do we need the statistics on that? No, if we choose to live that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, another cognitive distortion that a lot of people already kind of know about is that black and white thinking. Either something is all good or all bad,
Mm-hmm.
which again, maybe kicking a hornet's nest, all bad. I can't think of a benefit to that, but um, especially with human beings, very rarely. I was going to say very rarely. I don't know that it could even exist that someone's all good or all bad. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
um, so there are so many things that we do interpret as, well, that's a good thing or that's a bad thing. Um, Whereas if we focus in, it's just not that simplistic. So, um, just going through a couple more, and then I want to get to some that are a little more subtle. But another cognitive distortion is like shoulds and expectations.
Mm.
Like, you should be doing this. A good man should do this. Whatever, a teacher should be this.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, that's a very helpful thought and possibly a very accurate thought. And in other ways, it can be a very limiting thought and a very shameful way of thinking, and a way to maybe stop progress. If we think, I don't know, women should wear skirts, it kind of can stifle that. Or
Mm-hmm.
so again, it's just about kind of analyzing the things you're thinking. And we're talking about cognitive distortions because last time we talked about thought replacement, and
Right.
cognitive distortions are often accompany those automatic thoughts that aren't necessarily helpful to us, that aren't necessarily true, or we don't believe them 100%, and they're not necessarily helpful. So to kind of suss out if there is a distortion in there somehow. So another cognitive distortion that's a little more difficult to see and a little more difficult to recognize if you're doing it or someone else is doing it is personalization, where you take things personally. You take
Mm.
things as being um, directed toward you. And my example of this is that one time I was at a casino. Don't judge. I guess there's a cognitive distortion in there somewhere about people who
About
go to
casinos.
casinos. Yeah. So anyway, I was at a casino that where you were allowed to smoke. I was in the smoking section, and I had a little cold, so every once in a while I would, cough like that.
Mm-hmm.
May have sounded a little fakey, but I was just minding my own business, um, and doing this little cough every once in a while. And what to me seemed random is this man came up to me and started yelling at me about how he was allowed to smoke. I had no business to tell him not to smoke, and this was a smoking casino, and if I wanted to him not to, I should go somewhere else if it bothered me. And I was I mean, I was not a little, but I was very befuddled,
Mm-hmm.
to pull in a fun word. I was very befuddled, and thought, what did I miss here? Uh, and what I finally put together, and actually I don't know if this is actually true, but what makes sense to me is that he had interpreted my cold, which caused
Mm-hmm.
my cough, as a message toward him. And that message was he shouldn't smoke.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, definitely not personal. Sometimes those things can be personal. In this situation, he very much personalized that when it wasn't even close to having anything to do with him or
You
smoking for
hadn't even
that
noticed
matter.
him. Yeah.
Exactly. I hadn't actually noticed that I had that little cough. It took me a while. I was thinking about it, and then I coughed a little, and then I went, oh, what? Oh. And
You
again,
know,
don't know that for sure, but um,
and being with the social anxiety over here, I can totally empathize with where you were at. Because, when you have a little bit of a cough, but you're in a public space and you're trying to be polite, you do that,
mhm.
that sounds fake because you're just trying to minimize it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And again, sometimes those people make passive aggressive, or what they think are
Yeah.
have very pointed body language, or gestures or something that uh, maybe are directed towards you. Like,
Yeah.
if I can't think of something, if you started um, talking about somebody, and oh, this person really irritates me, and I saw them walking up behind you, I might go, Anna,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
that is directed towards you and directed towards the situation. So again, it's that distortion. It's making sure you're focused and using that accurately.
Gotcha.
Um, and another one that's related to that is emotional reasoning. And this is one that it takes a little while to maybe wrap your brain around, but that is taking things in a personal way, in that if I feel something, you meant to make me feel that. If I
Mm.
feel scared, you scared me. If I feel sad, you were trying to make me sad.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes very true, and I don't like, excuse me, that was a real cough.
No.
I don't like going the complete other direction, which tends to be a trend right now of that nobody can make me feel angry unless I give them permission to make me feel angry. Nobody can make me
Right.
feel sad unless I give them permission to make me feel sad.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's pretty extreme. And Anna, I know you well enough that I'm 99% sure I can make you cry, and maybe 80% sure I can make you angry.
Mm-hmm.
Again, make, however you want to interpret that, lead you very strongly to, those
Right.
emotions. Um, would I be able to do that with my next door neighbor? Probably not. Would I be able to do that with my daughter? I'm like 99.999% sure. So if I have an emotional reaction, sometimes that person was trying to get me to have that reaction.
Yeah.
Sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were clueless. Sometimes I wasn't even in their circle of thinking they were having an effect. And again, going
Mm-hmm.
back to that smoking idea, that man probably was angry. He certainly looked angry, and then assumed I was trying to make him angry.
Yeah.
Not only was I directing my cough towards him, but I was directing my cough towards him in order to elicit this emotional response simply because he had that emotional response.
Yeah.
So, again, sometimes people are trying to elicit an emotional response out of you, sometimes they're not. Your feeling of that emotional response isn't the indicator of whether someone else was trying for that or not.
So I think the short answer so far that I'm getting from this is that cognitive distortions are just moments when you should pause and make sure you're looking at it through the right lens,
Yeah, or looking at it
good,
through
bad, or indifferent.
yeah, looking at it through the clearest lens, not a distorted lens. Yeah, to make sure that the any negative result from that interaction isn't because of the lens you're looking through,
Okay.
but is closer to accurate. So yeah, cognitive distortions aren't falsehoods. Um, they're simply it's to stop and think about it a little bit, because sometimes I can think someone's making a comment very personal towards me by their little coughs, and maybe it's true, and sometimes I can think that they're doing that and maybe it's false.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, kind of honing in on it and doing a little thinking. And the bigger thing is, if you're not even aware that these exist, you're going to assume that your interpretation of the world is accurate as to what is actually happening in the world. So if you aren't aware that that everybody, including you, tends to see things or sort things in good or bad, black and white,
Mm-hmm.
or that your brain, as well as everybody else's, does tend to overgeneralize, and again, nothing wrong with that, but if you're not aware that you overgeneralize, you're not even going to consider whether your glasses are out of focus or distorted.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So, introduction to just a couple of cognitive distortions. Depending on what list you look at, there's either 10 or 800.
Oh.
Um, I'm exaggerating some, but it's kind of like saying how many colors are there, and you can say,
Mm-hmm.
well, there's 6, or you can say, oh, you can probably name probably 1,000, if depending on how much you want to hone in on it. So there's a lot of cognitive distortions. There's definitely some real common ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're going to continue this conversation about different specific cognitive distortions that are a little harder to see at a later podcast.
For more resources, shop at www.upandupwellness.com and hit that subscribe button. If you are in crisis and struggling right now, the national hotline is 988, and they can help you any time of the day or night.